This happened last summer when I decided to test myself on the Appalachian Trail. I've been an outdoors person since high school, but never anything hardcore. I'd done weekend hikes, long day trips, and some overnight camping, but this time I wanted to attempt a week alone. No friends to distract me, no one to keep pace, just me, a tent, a pack, and the trail. The first 3 days were what I imagined in all my training daydreams. Long green tunnel walks where the sunlight fell through the canopy like golden shafts, cool evenings where I cooked noodles on my small camping stove, and the endless quiet that felt almost sacred. That quiet was something you start to notice differently after 48 hours. At first it's relaxing, freeing, like you're unplugging from life. But as each day goes on, that same stillness takes on a kind of weight. It presses on your ears until you start to think you can hear your own skin stretching, like a pressure chamber. On the 4th night, I picked a camping spot that looked normal enough, open enough for safety, flat enough for my tent, not too far from a spring where I had filtered water earlier. I was mid-cook, stirring dehydrated chili in the little tin cup, when I noticed something strange. In the trees ahead of me, maybe 50 feet or so back, there was a flash of orange. The strangest part, it didn't flicker. It wasn't a fire, not a hiker's headlamp beam either. It was still, almost like someone wearing a blaze orange hunting coat was just standing there between the pines. I froze with the spoon mid-air, waiting for them to emerge, wave, say something. That alone would have been a relief. Plenty of through hikers pass along that trail, and I'd been craving some human contact. But the figure didn't move. Not when I shifted. Not when I stood up and waved. "Hey!" I yelled. The sound shot through the woods, but felt flat. Swallowed by the thick dark, eaning trees. Nothing. Eventually I forced myself to move closer, every step crunching leaves louder than I meant. By the time I closed in, there was nothing. Not a coat, not a person, not even bright bark or flagging tape that I might have mistaken. Just needles and shadows bending in the breeze. When I came back to camp, I didn't have much of an appetite anymore. The chili half burned, half cold in the pot. I forced myself to eat and got into my tent early, double-checking the zippers, checking my headlamp batteries, then tucking the knife by my sleeping bag in what felt like childish paranoia. Sometime later, maybe midnight, I snapped awake. There was no thunder, no obvious reason. I just woke up. And outside my tent, maybe 10 feet away, someone was humming. It wasn't a tune I recognized, not a song, just a series of low, wavering notes strung together slowly, like they weren't even certain what they were humming. A deep voice. Male. I was instantly wide awake, gripping the knife so hard that the plastic handle squeaked. I craned my neck trying to see through the tent nylon, my mind racing. All I could picture was the blaze orange from earlier, standing 50 feet away, now closer, just listening. The humming didn't stop, but neither did it move closer. It went on maybe 2 whole minutes before growing softer, fading, and then gone. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. At the first suggestion of grey in the sky, I was up, packed, and moving. That day, I hiked harder than I ever had in my life, faster and further until my legs were trembling. Lunch was just 2 granola bars and whatever lake water I could scoop. I didn't stop until late evening when my body almost collapsed, lungs rattling. I picked a new campsite without thinking, somewhere off the main trail in a pine grove where I hoped I'd be hidden. For the first hour, I had convinced myself the last night was my imagination. Maybe a trick of sleep paralysis, paranoia playing in the wood's eerie silence. I almost slept. Then again, the noise. Not humming this time. Laughing. It wasn't loud laughter. Not hearty, not forced. Playful. Like someone trying to mimic a kid's giggle in a grown man's throat. Each time it came, it moved slightly to the right, then behind my tent, then circling me. I clutched the knife again, but this time I didn't scream. I couldn't think of anything except staying small, staying silent. My stomach cramped from keeping still. Hours passed like that, me rooted to the floor of the tent, fingers white on the blade, ears straining for anything. When morning came and I staggered outside, there were marks in the dirt all around the tent. Footprints, bare, large, flat, broad feet with soles smeared in what looked like clay. They circled my tent 3 times, casually, like someone pacing. The worst part? There was only one set. Whoever had stood outside all night hadn't come or gone. They had just been there, watching, until they decided to melt back into the trees, leaving me with nothing but the memory of laughing, low and playful, carrying off through the woods. I cut the trip short after that. Called it quits. I still hike now and then, but never alone, and never when I know nightfall will catch me far from safety. Even with people around, I sometimes swear I hear humming tucked into the wind across the canopy, a reminder that if the woods want to unsettle you, they don't need monsters at all, just another human with wrong intentions. 2 summers ago, I joined a small group expedition in Montana. I was inexperienced, but compared with the 2 guys I was with, I may as well have been a tourist. One was a seasoned ex-park ranger named Doug, with the thick kind of beard you expect from men who've lived out in the wilderness half their lives. The other was James, a wiry, restless backpacker who'd spent years doing trails up and down the Rockies. We weren't close friends, more like acquaintances through a mountaineering forum, but that's how those trips often start, strangers brought together by a love of trails and a willingness to trust. The plan was to take a week to explore a remote ridge separating 3 creeks, all away from the usual hikers. Off-trail stuff. We each packed for full independence, but we stuck together since bears had been sighted in the area. By day 2, we were further from civilization than I had ever been. No cell service, no roads, no sound of anything but wind in the grasslands or the hollow echo of ravens against granite walls. There's a romance to being out there, but there's also something unsettling about footsteps being the loudest noise for miles. On the 3rd night, we set camp in a small basin, shielded by pines on 3 sides with a sharp ridge to the 4th. The sky was clear, littered with more stars than my city-raised brain could process. I half-dozed in my sleeping bag while Doug tended a whispering fire. James had wandered a little off with his camera. He was obsessed with shooting time-lapse frames of cliffs against starlight. That night broke whatever illusion I had that nature was predictable. Somewhere past midnight, when I had drifted into light sleep, I woke to the sound of James calling for us. Not panicking, not loud, just insistent. "Hey, come check this out," he called from beyond the pine line. I unzipped my tent, half asleep but curious. Doug was already crouched up by the fire, listening. The voice came again. "Over here. You got to see this." But Doug's face was tight, his hand on the handle of his knife. He whispered, "Stay here." Then he cupped his hands and called back into the woods. "James, you okay?" The reply came fast, same tone, same volume. "Yeah, just come here quickly." Normally, James's voice had a playful rise to it, almost sarcastic, but this was flatter, more deliberate, like someone trying to replay his exact tone but missing the nuance. Doug stood up slowly. "That's not him," he mouthed. I felt ice shoot through me. Within seconds, Doug stomped toward the pines, yelling now at the top of his lungs. "Cut it out now, James! Come on back!" His voice echoed across the basin like stone cracking. And then, from behind us, the flap of James's tent rustled. He groaned, coughing, hair sticking in every direction as he crawled halfway out. "Why are you yelling?" he muttered. He had been dead asleep. I nearly collapsed where I stood. Doug stopped moving, solid as an iron post, staring into the tree line. The fake voice didn't call again. Silence fell thicker than anything I'd ever felt. We didn't go back to sleep. One of us tended the fire while both Doug and I clutched blades until morning. James kept asking what was going on until finally we told him. Watching colour drain from his face, even in a firelight, was almost worse than hearing the voice. He knew better than anyone how far we were from any other soul. At dawn, Doug and I scanned the tree line. Less than 100 feet away, in a bed of needles under 2 pines, was a circle of stones about a foot wide. A ring, perfectly laid, nothing inside it. The kind of thing people make when they're bored and stacking rocks at trailheads. But these weren't trailhead stones. These were deep in wilderness, where no bored kids or casual campers were supposed to be. That day, we pressed on faster, hiking almost double our planned distance. Every twig crack set me on edge. Every breeze croaking through the treetops sounded like it could mask something else. The encounter grew worse the following night. Around the same hour, just as the fire dimmed and the stars bore down, it happened again. The voice, clear, smooth, copying James's tone in that strange monotone imitation. "Hey, come over here. You got to see this." Only this time, it didn't come from the tree line. It came from multiple directions. Left, right, behind. Each faint, like echoes rolling over rocks, and all the while the real James sat frozen between us, knees clutched, eyes wide like a kid. I insisted we leave. Doug nodded, though he looked reluctant, like part of him wanted to wait and confront whoever or whatever this was. But the logic was clear. Staying meant risking a nighttime confrontation with something we didn't understand. We pulled camp within 10 minutes, tents half collapsed, food half stuffed, fire snuffed clumsily. By the time we were hiking, it was a little past 1 a.m. The worst part about night hiking is how ruined your depth perception becomes. Every branch dips like a figure. Every root tangles near your ankle like a waiting hand. We made 5 miles that night, uphill most of the way. None of us said a word. At dawn, we finally collapsed by a narrow riverbank, hiding the tents in dense growth. I don't know if exhaustion outweighed fear, but eventually we all descended into dreamless, heavy sleep. The last time it happened was the following evening. We had just finished scrambling over a scree slope when Doug swore low and bitter. Ahead of us on the ridge, balanced on top of a boulder, were 6 new stone circles, each one bigger than the one we had found before, marching like a path marker toward the tree line. Doubling our pace hadn't mattered. We weren't outpacing it. Whatever it was, we beat ourselves ragged hiking, and by the end of the 6th day, we stumbled back into human terrain, crossing paths with 2 hunters who gave us rides back to the lodge lot where Doug's truck was waiting. When the parking lot asphalt touched my boots, I felt tears sting. Pure release. It's been 2 years since then, and none of us have spoken about it much. Doug called it wood mimicry, something he claimed he'd heard stories about but never believed until then. James swears he doesn't remember the voice well. Maybe his mind is trying to protect itself. I remember every syllable of those flat, copycat words, and I'll never listen the same way again when people call my name from a distance, not until I see their face lined with genuine expression. Because out in the wilderness, even the voice of someone you know best can belong to something else entirely, something that doesn't miss, or stumble, or sound quite real. Back in 2019, my girlfriend at the time convinced me to join her and 2 of her friends on a multi-day hike in Northern California near Shasta Trinity National Forest. I agreed mostly to keep her happy, but I wasn't the outdoorsy type. I liked the scenery and exercise in moderation, but the idea of sleeping miles away from running water or a hot shower wasn't exactly my dream vacation. Still, I figured I'd go along, carry my share, and earn some points for being a supportive boyfriend. The group was me, my girlfriend Claire, her best friend Janelle, and Janelle's boyfriend Mark. Mark was the one who spearheaded the whole trip, a wiry guy with a constant smirk, always trying to one-up people with his wilderness wisdom. He wasn't malicious, just had an ego the size of his 60-litre backpack. The first day was grueling but manageable. A lot of rocks, loose gravel trails, long, gradual inclines. By the time we made camp that night next to a creek, my legs were jelly, but the air smelled clean. The stars stretched like powdered light across the sky, and I felt surprisingly proud of myself for making it. Nothing unusual. Until morning, when we got out of our tents, Mark's hiking boots were gone. At first he laughed it off, assuming he'd misplaced them, but after 30 minutes of tearing apart the camp, checking under logs, even fishing in the creek in case they'd floated, there was no sign. Hiking boots aren't just some side accessory, you need them. Luckily, he had an extra pair of light water shoes he'd packed, but they weren't meant for rugged climbs. He grumbled about the inconvenience, muttering that maybe raccoons dragged them off, though the explanation didn't make sense. The boots were heavy, not the kind of thing critters would haul away. We set off anyway, Mark clicking his tongue against his teeth with irritation the whole way. That evening, as we stopped at a ridge plateau with an incredible view of the lake below, my stomach dropped at what I found hanging on a branch about 6 feet up. Mark's boots, tied together by the laces, dangling neatly like some grim joke. The three of us froze. Mark turned pale, the smirk gone for once. "All right. Who did this?" he asked, voice tight. We swore we hadn't touched them. My heart raced, because the boots weren't just returned, they were deliberately displayed, strung up like some backwoods totem. That night, the woods pressed in around camp. Every little snap of branches made me whip my head. Claire admitted she was having trouble swallowing food, her throat dry, though she'd been guzzling water all afternoon. Mark tried to play alpha again, waving the boots like, "See, everyone relaxes, pranks up." But the way his eyes darted gave away the truth. He was rattled. I woke up sometime close to 2 a.m. Janelle was whispering fiercely outside the tent, her voice sharp like glass. I unzipped and poked my head out. She was sitting upright, staring toward the tree line. "What's wrong?" I whispered. She pointed, and my blood ran cold. There were lights between trees. Not lanterns, not headlamps, dim glow orbs of yellow and faint blue, bobbing slightly, weaving, like they were floating individual candles, moving side to side behind the screens of fir trunks. At first I thought my eyes were tricking me, some trick of moonlight on mist. But Claire crept up behind me, clutching my shoulder. "You see that too, right? That's not just me." The glowing drifted closer. Not in a straight line, not fast, but patient. Like whoever, or whatever, carried them had no rush. We clambered back into tents and zipped every flap like children hiding under blankets. No one slept. By sunrise, the lights vanished. Nothing but silent pines, a faint breeze, and the already roasting heat of another California day. But none of us wanted to linger. We packed with trembling hands and marched as fast as we could. By early afternoon, Janelle screamed. We all spun. Hung in another tree right off trail, swinging gently in the breeze, were the water shoes Mark wore the first day. Knotted together, dangling. He swore like he was choking on his own spit, then kicked the trunk so hard pine sap burst out. "Somebody's following us," he hissed, eyes darting. That night again, the floating lights returned, this time closer, weaving between trees barely 30 feet from camp, bobbing in hypnotic rhythm. I pressed my palms over my ears, convinced I could hear faint noises drifting with the lights, like snatches of melody, half-hummed, cut by static. When morning finally arrived, I swore I wasn't going to spend another night out there. I demanded we cut the trip short. Claire agreed immediately. Mark protested, trying one final time to salvage his pride, but his hands shook too much when he tried to untie his food bag from a branch. Janelle actually snapped at him to shut up, breaking his arrogant streak for good. We started back, but I couldn't help myself. I glanced into the woods every 10 steps, convinced those faint glows would follow. I wasn't wrong. For the next 3 miles, sometimes slipping between gaps in trees, sometimes just hovering in periphery vision, Faint blue-yellow pulses blinked. Not too close, never overtaking us, but watching, escorting. When the parking lot finally came into view, Claire clutched my hand so hard it cut off circulation. We practically sprinted the last 200 feet until the reassuring clunk of car doors shut us into safety. Mark tried to joke about it later online, something about hippie campers trying to freak us out. But Janelle didn't laugh. I didn't either, because deep down I knew no ordinary camper could hide boots one night, rehang them miles away at perfect height, trail us for 3 days straight, and glow with unearthly lights that slipped like oil between trees without a single flashlight beam. The forest knows how to copy human behavior just well enough to keep us guessing, and sometimes it leaves us small gifts. Just enough to remind us it's aware of our every step. Since that hike, I've never agreed to go when the plan involved more than one night out. And every time I lace my boots, I can't help glancing above, half waiting to find them dangling from branches I can't reach. I used to work as a seasonal wildlife tech in Colorado, which basically meant weeks of hiking trails to track impacts, count species signs, and sometimes camp out during stretches too remote for day loops. Rangers and biologists will tell you the same thing. Most of the time you're out there, you're more likely to run into wind or deer than anything threatening. But there's always that one story, the one you never quite shake off. This is mine. It was late autumn, just before heavy snow shut down high access points. My assignment was to check a series of backcountry clearings reported for elk movement. I carried light, since it wasn't meant to be overnight, but I packed a tarp just in case. The trek was peaceful. Leaves had already shed down to carpets of rust and crimson. The mountains framed everything in sharp ridgelines against a whitening sky. I sang to myself sometimes on these hikes, not to entertain, but to alert bears I was coming. I rarely felt uneasy. That day, though, there was a prickle in my gut I couldn't pin down. By mid-afternoon, I reached the third clearing. It looked perfectly normal. Meadow grass flattened by early frost, pines stooped under autumn fatigue, the occasional elk print muddying the damp ground. I made not. Sketched the tracks and took a few GPS photos. Then I started back up toward the ridge-cut trail. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. At the far side of the meadow, just within reach of the pines, was a small frame structure. 4 wooden posts, maybe 2 feet high, lashed together crudely, marking a square just big enough to hold, what? A dog? A child? But nothing was inside. It didn't look like survey work. No tag, no stake, no paint. Just a rough wooden shape erected on damp earth. I told myself it was junk some hunters threw together. Maybe a frame for drying meat. Still, it made my skin crawl. Heading back along the trail, a light snow began picking at my jacket, flakes drifting sideways in the muted air. My pace quickened. I wanted warmth, headlights, and civilization. But less than 10 minutes past the clearing, I came upon another one. An identical wooden square. Lashes of sapling branches tied to form a box frame slightly larger than the first. Same height, same crude twine binding each corner. This one sat directly to the right of the trail, almost like it had been left there for inspection. I stopped cold, goosebumps erupting even beneath thermal layers. The odds felt slim, too slim. And then something clicked at the back of my instincts, that animal whisper your conscious brain tries to block. A realization. These weren't meat racks or old camp projects. They looked just like graves. Shallow, forgotten graves marked only by small frames to outline what lay below. Fear vibrated so strongly through my bones that each muscle wanted to sprint, but my lungs fought to keep me measured. I pressed on, forcing myself not to run. Snow fell harder now, dusting each branch with pale glitter. Half an hour later, I saw the third one. A larger frame, 4 feet across, almost coffin-shaped. I've heard stories about forest shrines, piles of stones, carved sticks, memorials for lost hikers. But this was different. too deliberate, too secret. And there weren't flowers or trinkets, only silent frames big enough to imagine something horrifying inside. I kept climbing until breath clawed at my lungs and sweat merged with snowmelt. Checking my GPS, I realized I'd overextended. The quickest loop back was to cut through another meadow and meet the service road 3 miles west. I decided anything was better than doubling back past those frames. The meadow glistened beneath white haze when I reached it. What little daylight remained turned silver behind clouds, spotlighting the field. That's when I saw movement. At first I thought it was an elk shifting in tall grass, but as my eyes adjusted, my throat dried up. Someone was crouched in the field, broad, hunched, wearing ragged brown cloth that blended so well I'd almost missed them. They weren't walking, they weren't stalking, just crouched, unmoving, head tilted in a way that reminded me of crows studying roadkill. My first instinct was to call out, but the second saved me. Everything about their posture screamed unnatural stillness, a predator choosing delay over haste. I backed slowly, boots squelching in wet soil. My heart jammed itself into my throat. For a long time the figure didn't move. Then, with an awful slowness, their head turned until I could swear, though I'll never prove, they locked eyes with me across the frozen air. That was enough. I bolted, sprinting, stumbling, lungs tearing as terrain blurred. Branches whipped, snow blinded, but adrenaline carried me until the service road finally appeared like salvation. My truck waited nearly a mile down, but even the asphalt beneath my boots felt safer than the hush of forest. When I reached the vehicle, I collapsed against the hood, sucking oxygen until my chest stopped heaving. I peered back. The road was empty. Just an endless thread of powder and forest. Whoever or whatever I saw had not followed. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that those frames were tied to the figure. That maybe each growing square was less memorial, more preparation. For what? I'll never know. I filed my basic species report the next day, excluding every detail of the graves, the crouching figure, the way the woods pulsed as though holding a secret heartbeat. Call it self-preservation or cowardice. I didn't want my supervisors asking questions, dismissing me, forcing me to go back and collect evidence. I haven't worked seasonal tech roles since. I stuck to desk biology, city trees, and controlled parks. Still plenty of dirt, but never dirt that breathes under your feet like those meadows. Sometimes, when I try to rationalize, I think about hunters or trappers constructing markers for some old tradition. But then I remember the scaled sizes, growing larger with each mile, the way my gut knew before my brain that I wasn't looking at random frames. I was looking at the steps, a sequence, expanding for who knows how long. And most of all, I remember that hunched silhouette in fabric like mud, watching, tilting its head, patient beyond reason. If you ever hike alone in late fall and snow starts to trickle in silver veils, watch the edges of meadows. If you notice sticks lashed in squares, tied tighter than a hiker would bother with, don't stick around to measure them. Don't tell yourself it's nothing, because you're not just being marked, you're being counted.